Hello, and welcome to the second edition of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association Ramp Camp. And today we are going to be focusing on Component 6, or Section 6 of the RAMP application, which is the annual calendar. And at the end of this presentation, we hope that you will be able to feel comfortable creating an annual calendar aligned with the ASCA National Model and RAMP scoring rubric, and also discuss the importance of sharing the annual calendar as well as using an annual calendar. So this RAMP Camp is really an important and valuable tool if you are considering or in the process of submitting a RAMP application, but it also is a really great tool to use if you are just interested in learning about the components of a comprehensive school counseling program. And the annual calendar is such a great place to start when you're thinking about creating a comprehensive school counseling program. It's a great tool to use every year, but it is really an important and valuable part of the RAMP application as well. So who am I? I guess I should introduce myself first. My name is Leslie Delvecchio Marks. I am a K-3 school counselor in a school located in suburban Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am also on the board of directors of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association. And in 2020, I was privileged enough to have been named the 2020-2021 Pennsylvania School Counselor of the Year, which is really a great honor in my life. Also, in 2022, I was named one of the 5 ASCA certified school counselors in the nation. And in 2022, in that same year, my school, Birchfield Primary School, was named a RAMP School of Distinction. We were one of the first Pennsylvania schools of distinction, and it's such a great honor for us. And for me, just in going through the RAMP application for the first time. And because of my work with the RAMP application, kind of going through it, I am now a RAMP reviewer. So I'm hoping that my knowledge gained from actually being in the trenches and going through the creation of a comprehensive school counseling program and then highlighting that comprehensive school counseling program in the form of the RAMP application, which is really just a snapshot of the proof that you're doing a comprehensive school counseling program. Going through that process, and now being a RAMP reviewer and being on the other end and seeing what RAMP reviewers are looking for in applications, I'm hoping my knowledge will help you in whatever stage you are in this process. So today, as I said, we're going to be specifically talking about the annual calendar. But what is an annual calendar? Well, an annual calendar is a calendar that is developed and published to specify school counseling program events and activities. All of the events and activities that are a part of a school counseling program are and should be included in an annual calendar. The calendar also provides structure to the total comprehensive program, ensuring that it is comprehensive and that it is delivered at the best possible time. And you will see as you create your annual calendar, or if you've already created a calendar, sometimes things you have planned for the year may change throughout the year or change from year to year. So maybe you were always planning or considering doing a particular group or a classroom lesson at a certain time during the year. You may see through the use of an annual calendar and data and through the, just in being in that comprehensive programming, that maybe that timing wasn't the best. And that annual calendar allows you to plan differently and make sure that your services are delivered at that best time for your program. And also the annual calendar validates the school counseling program's specific and unique contribution to the school's overall mission, and it supports it. So it kind of validates and highlights all of the things that the school counseling program is contributing to that school and the mission of that school. And the annual calendar includes sufficient detail for readers to discern the actual start and stop times and dates and the content of the session and category of service that each represents. So as you'll see as we move along this presentation, that it is really important to be specific as much as you can in the creation and listing of programmings and activities in this particular calendar. So this is a snapshot specifically of the RAMP rubric for this section of the RAMP application. The annual calendar is section 6, and it is worth 3 points. Now, those of you that may have applied for RAMP before or who were familiar with the RAMP application, if you notice, this calendar or this particular section is not called calendars. It's called annual calendar because most recently they have eliminated the requirement for the weekly calendar. So that's great. The weekly calendar is great, but they just have now narrowed it down to just the annual calendar. And like I said, this section is worth 3 points. Now, what I'd like to do is actually show you where to find the rubric on the ASCA website. And that can be found if you go to the American School Counselor Association tab or website. You want to look for the tab that's called Recognition. And once you go to Recognition, you want to go all the way up to RAMP. It says Recognized ASCA Model Program. And when you touch that, it will open up the option for the scoring rubric, which is on the side of the screen here. And this will open up the entire 2023 scoring rubric, which is what rubric we are discussing in this particular presentation. But each year that'll change. And if there's any updates, you can still find that material in the same location on the website. So I want to specifically just go back to that before I get into the template, the actual scoring rubric. We will talk about these 3 sections. And to start, just to let you know, there's 3 points. So you can get 1 point for section 6A, 1 point for 6B, and there's 2 descriptors in 6B, and 1 point for 6C. So your first point comes from actually using the annual calendar template. You can also find the templates located in that same section on the ASCA website too. So as soon as you utilize the actual annual calendar template, and when you save it, you'll save it as a PDF, you get 1 point for that, for using it. So that's a nice, easy point. Now, section 2 gets into more specifics, and we're going to talk about this more as we move along the presentation. And I just want to specify, and you'll hear me say this several times, is very important to include specific dates and times when appropriate in that calendar when you get into the specifics. And then you get 1 more point for the reflection, and I'll give you some tips on the reflection as well. So this is generally what we're looking at, and we'll get into more details about these 3 sections of the RAMP rubric. But first, let's look at what the annual calendar template looks like. This is what you need to use to get that first point in that RAMP application for this section. And if you've never seen this before, what you do is you will list your school up here and the academic school year. So you will see an example coming up here soon where I actually am going to show you the calendar that I used for my RAMP submission, and it said it was part of the 2020-2021 school year. As you can see at the top, there are 3 sections that you will be dividing up your programming in. The delivery sections include direct student service activities and indirect student service activities. And you'll see as you move along this calendar that these 2 sections and the activities probably should make up at least 80% of the time. You'll see most of your activities are located in these 2 sections. So let me just go back here. And this 3rd section is any kind of program planning or anything that you do that supports the overall school counseling program. So in case you get confused about the difference between direct and indirect, as I used to, I always like to point out that direct student services are anything that you do that in which you have a student or students directly in front of you, that you're working right with them. It includes classroom lessons, any school-wide programming that you have students around you that you're involved in, or like I think of Career Day, for example, or small groups, anything that where you have students directly in front of you fall into this category. Indirect or any kind of collaborations or leadership meetings, advocacy activities where you're indirectly benefiting those students, but they're not directly in front of you. So if you have a parent meeting, that would fall under indirect student services. If a student is sitting in on a parent meeting, then it becomes direct. So anytime that at least one student is directly in front of you, it's direct student services. Now, program planning and school support or any of those other activities that support your programming. So professional development, staff meetings, creation of newsletters, anything like that goes into this category, program planning. And like I said, when I show you my example, you'll see some specific things listed there. So this is the actual annual annual calendar template. Some things you want to keep in mind when you are adding things to your calendar is that you want to include any kind of regular programming that you do. And let me just go back again one more time. I'm sorry. If we look at this annual calendar at the top, where it says ongoing services right here, you want to include anything that's done all throughout the year in this section. So you'll see this is a larger section. So instead of listing, for example, a direct service, individual counseling, you would not list it under every month here. You would just list it under ongoing services because that's something that happens ongoing throughout the school year. But specific things that you may do, like maybe a specific group that maybe you do in October, would be listed under October because it's not done the whole school year. It might be done for 12 sessions or 6 sessions like that. So ongoing services are listed at the top. Okay, so let me just get into the specifics again. So any regular programming that you do, you want to include on your calendar. So that would include classroom lessons, small groups, any kind of parent information sessions, parent nights, parent days, where you're providing information, any type of meetings that you're involved in that benefit students, SAP meetings, SAPE meetings, MTSS meetings, and then any kind of big events that also benefit students that are a part of your programming, like back to school nights, open houses, college or career fairs or career days, also any signing days, award nights, things like that should also be included on your calendar. Also, you want to make sure that what you do is publicized. So when you make your calendar, you want to publish it and share it. So you can share it on school counseling program bulletin boards. You can share it month to month around the school. You can send it via email to your staff members. You can post it in the main office or administrative offices, or if you have a career center or a media center, or even in your classroom or other classrooms. I think a great way to share it is on a school website or a school counseling website. So sometimes you may have both. In my case, I do. So I have a school website, and you can share that calendar just in general, like on the side tab or something of your school's website. And definitely for me, it's on my school counseling website as well. It's listed as one of the tabs, and that's a great and easy way to share it. And also, if you have a student newspaper or or a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that you use, you can include that calendar in it. And also, you want to mention it when you're talking to parent groups. If you are a speaker at a PTO meeting and you're talking about your role, for example, you can certainly point out what the annual calendar is and show them how to access it. And also, as you will see later in the RAMP Camp, when we talk about advisory council, you will see that this is a part of the advisory council meetings. You share your annual calendar with the members of your advisory council. So really, any creative way that you can share your calendar is great, and you really want to publicize it. It's a great advocacy tool, but it's really a great information sharing tool, educational tool as well. Now, this is an example of the annual calendar that I submitted during my RAMP year. So as you can see, the school is listed at the top. The academic year is listed at the top, and there are those 3 areas again, the direct student services, indirect, and program planning. Ongoing services is always listed first. So these, like I said, are all those activities that are happening ongoing throughout the school year. So ongoing is individual counseling with students, new student transition planning. As we know, as counselors, new students enter and exit throughout the school year. And we all often get new students at the beginning of the year, of course, but sometimes throughout the year. So that's an ongoing activity. That's not something you would know specifically. So you can list that under ongoing services. I did weekly lunches with students that I called Connections Cafe. So instead of listing Connections Cafe in every month, I just have it listed under ongoing services and etc. here. Indirect student services include things like those meetings where you're indirectly benefiting students. So any kind of collaboration with administrators, staff, and parents can be listed here. SWIBIS team involving the PBIS, any trainings that you go through. This particular year, our school was going through PBIS training monthly, so that was included at the top. Any grade level meetings, collaboration, especially with people for your annual student outcome goal. This particular year, my two goals were focused on a second grade group and a third grade group of students target group. So the collaboration meetings with those second and third grade teachers, I included in indirect services under ongoing. And then program planning or any of those professional development activities that you may be involved in, any district committees, staff meetings, anything that you participate in that's ongoing, like more than like one time throughout the year, you want to include up here. And these are some examples of that too. Now, as you look along at the calendar and you look further down, specific months, you want to try to identify more specific things. So for example, I was involved in September in a kindergarten student orientation. I was a speaker at the orientation. I was taking kids around and families of kids around the building. So I was directly involved with those students. I gave the date of that orientation and the times. There were two that day. So I specified that because I was able to. Also under indirect, there was another kindergarten orientation that was just for parents. I listed the date of that and the times. And then over here in the program planning, I had a governing board meeting that year. There was a department meeting, and I listed all that with the time if possible. But we had some district and service meetings. I didn't list the times of those. I just put the date range, and that is fine. And now we will get more specific about some of categories into the annual calendar. So this is just another example of some month by month listings that I wanted to share with you just to help you out a little bit. As you can see here, like for example, friendship group, I have listed it's K through 2. So that's the students involved in it. It was in May, and the months that happened were May 6th through May 13th of 2021. Let's see what else here. PSSA assembly, grade 3 can be in parentheses, and I have the date and times of that. You just want to be really, really specific about the things that you're doing, even as much as trainings that you attend. Or I had a meeting with Senator Williams on this particular date. It was during, it was like a virtual meeting. I have that listed on there at the time. Just be very, very specific. And I also wanted to just caution you to watch your acronyms. You just have to make sure that people know who are not in your school system who are not you, what a certain acronym may mean. So in considering the rubric and considering your annual calendar and the things that you put in your annual calendar, you want to make sure that it's like a crosswalk, that all of the activities that are specifically listed in the classroom and group mindsets and behaviors action plan, which you just watched the beginning of the video on, you want to make sure that they are all included in your annual calendar. And if you think about it, when you're creating a comprehensive school counseling program, that classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan includes the standards for the things that you are delivering, whether that's a group or a classroom lesson. So if you are doing a group, an anxiety support group, for example, you will, and you should have standards aligned to it that are already designated in your classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan. And that particular group is already noted on your action plan. So it should also be listed on your calendar. And you want to make sure that you have the same titles for both. So if that group is called your Worry Busters group, for example, and that's what you call it on your annual calendar, that Worry Busters term should also be used on your classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan. You want to make sure you are consistent and specific, and you want to make sure as you're looking through both of these documents that you have everything accounted for. And the reason why I say that is RAMP reviewers do that. They look at your classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan, and they look for specific activities, and then they look at your annual calendar and vice versa. If it's on your annual calendar, it should be listed on that classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan. Same thing goes for your closing the gap action plan. When you have an annual student outcome goal, and one of those annual student outcome goals, or maybe your only annual student outcome goal, is a closing the gap goal, and you talk about how you're going to close that gap and you list specific interventions, you want to make sure that those interventions are listed on your annual calendar specifically. But if it's a particular group or a classroom lesson, that intervention is also listed on your classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan. Everything just has to be consistent. It's just really proving that you're using what you're saying you're using, or you're doing what you're saying you're doing. So when you do that naturally, this is not hard. You just want to make sure, though, when you're submitting a RAMP application, that you do have those things listed under the same names and they are included. And the other thing, of course, as we talked about, is on that annual calendar, and that rubric's looking for this too, that you list all those school counseling programs with topics, dates, and times. So these three things are key to keep in mind when you're listing things on your annual calendar and when you're reviewing the rubric for this particular section and also the other sections for sure. So looking again at that annual calendar rubric. So once again, section 6A, to get to the point, and remember there's 3 points possible, you need to make sure you read all of those descriptors and make sure that you complete them, because points are all or nothing. You either earn 1 point for each section or 0 points. For example, in 6B, the annual calendar, you get 1 point if both of these descriptors are met. So looking at 6A, you get 1 point if you use the annual calendar template and it's completed. That's an easy point, friends. For section 6B, there's 2 descriptors. 6B1 says that all activities, and we just talked about this, from the classroom and group mindsets and behaviors action plan, and also the closing the gap action plan, and school counseling program events are listed on the annual calendar with the topics, dates, and if appropriate, the times. That was just what we talked about in the previous slide. You include all the activities from that classroom and group mindsets and behaviors action plan, plus the interventions that you put in your closing the gap action plan, as well as school counseling program events. They should all be included on your annual calendar. The second thing is you want to make sure that they're classified in the correct areas according to the ASCA National Model definitions of direct services, indirect services, and the program planning and school support. So just, and you know this, but you'll see this, but just make sure direct services, again, are all those activities and where you have a student sitting directly in front of you. Indirect are things that you're doing for those students, but they may involve other people that help that student, but aren't directly the students. So that could include parents and staff members and administrators. Anything indirectly goes under that category. And then anything you do that helps you enhance your program or plan for your program go into that third component, that program planning and school support. Those trainings and meetings and things like that, staff meetings and things like that. So just make sure you have them in the right area. And if you have those 2 things done, you get another point. Now, the reflection we'll talk about more, but the biggest key that I want you to keep in mind for any reflection is that you want to do what it's asking you to do. So in this particular section, it says, give 3 examples of how the annual calendar is communicated to stakeholders. If they're asking for 3, you need to give 3, at least 3. And then you need to give examples of how they're communicated. So 3 examples are the key. So I want to, and the other key is, you want to make sure that it's a maximum of 250 words. So just to get into that a little bit more specifically, you want to make sure, again, to provide 3 examples of how the calendar is communicated to stakeholders. And one really great way to phrase that in a nice, easy way to understand that if you're a RAMP reviewer is to phrase that reflection with something like, the annual calendar is shared and communicated to stakeholders in a variety of ways. One of the first ways that we share our annual calendar is through our school counseling website. And then you give some specifics on that. Another way that the annual calendar is communicated is at our advisory council meeting. It's communicated in the fall and the spring. And then a third way that we share and communicate our annual calendar is by sharing it monthly with our school through emails, and it's also posted outside of our offices and in our counseling department window or whatever. You just want to get into the specifics, and you want to say first and second and a third way so that it's really easy to see your examples, and a reviewer can see right away, boom, they gave 3 examples of how that annual calendar is communicated. So just real simple. It almost goes back to that basic English we learned back in the day. Complete sentences, make sure you start with that topic sentence and end. 250 words. That's a really great way to think of your reflections. And it's only 250 words. So they just really want the content. So in summary, some things to keep in mind when you're creating your annual calendar. I'm going to go over some do's and don'ts. These are also listed. Some of these are listed in the Ask a National Model Blue implementation guide. Just make sure it says on the front, aligned with the Ask a National Model 4th edition. But just so you know, some do's and don'ts. Let's start with our do's first. First, keep in mind that you have 1 calendar per school counseling program. So if you are a solo counselor in a building, that's easy because there's only one of you and you're talking about all the things that you do. But if you are not a solo counselor and you have multiple counselors in your building, all of those activities are included in 1 calendar for all of the counselors. So let's say one of your counselors is a 9th grade counselor, and your 9th grade counselor in October does a 9th grade career lesson, Pathways to Success. You would just put on there Pathways to Success, grade 9, and you put the date range of those lessons. And then maybe one of your other counselors does something else in another grade level. You put that on there, specify the grade, but you all participate in red ribbon activities. You include all of that on there. So just 1 calendar for the school counseling program. Also, you want to make sure you do post or publish the calendar. Like I said, it's a great advocacy tool and a public relations booster. It informs, it advocates. It's just a great tool. Nice. It should be nice and easy to read, to follow. ASCA does ask that you type in your responses to you type on your annual calendar instead of handwrite. I don't know if anybody handwrites anymore, but if you're considering that, make sure you type it instead. It's just easier to read. Also, make sure that you do include activities that link specifically to those student outcome goals that you have. And like I said, they're already going to be listed in your Closing the Gap action plan, in your mindset and group classroom and group mindset and behavior action plan. So just make sure that they are linked to those annual student outcome goals, include them on your calendar, include all the components, like I said, again, of that plan, and make sure that you include any academic, career, and social emotional domain components. I mean, that's what you're doing anyway, but make sure you do include them. And as you get more used to creating your calendar every year, you will not forget that, because you are servicing in 3 domains, so you'll include this, but just make sure you do. And make sure that you use that calendar to organize your comprehensive school counseling program. It's my best organization tool. I reference it several times a year. It's actually open on one of the tabs on my laptop every day. I go back and check it. You plan your calendar in the beginning of the year, and then you change things throughout the year. You add your date ranges and times if you can, and it really just helps you to organize it. So these are the do's for the annual calendar. There are some don'ts, though, that we want you to be aware of, too. First, big don't hide your calendar. Let others know what you do, friend. As a school counselor, you are one of the biggest advocates for the students in your school, but you also are an advocate for school counseling programming. So don't hide what you do. Let people know the answer to the question, what does she or what does he do all day? This answers that question. Don't be apprehensive about publishing that calendar. These calendars demonstrate the time and services provided in the school. And don't you be surprised either when you first set up an annual calendar for the first time, that you have a moment where you're like, wow, I really do a lot. Or we really do a lot. And you do. I mean, sometimes we're just in that mode where we just do. But when you have it broken down and you think, wow, this is really a lot. And other people will think the same thing when they see your calendar. Also, don't use generic terms. Really watch your acronyms. Be specific about your lessons, your meetings, your group topics, and your programs. Be specific, because ramp reviewers and parents and other stakeholders, they may not know what you mean. So you want to really be clear and have somebody. I would encourage you to have somebody who is a colleague or somebody outside of your school. And if it's a colleague, maybe outside of your particular level. So if you're a high school counselor, maybe you do want to have an elementary counselor review your calendar and see if they have any questions for you. Because if they have questions for you, a ramp reviewer will also have questions. Don't include, and this is a big no-no. This is a big don't. Don't include student identifiers. That includes names or pictures in any public calendar. If you do, you may not only lose points for that section, but you may even lose the application. That's how serious ASCA is about that. So do not include any student identifiers. If you are listing something where maybe a student is involved, you want to put an initial or a made-up initial or something like that, but do not put any student names or pictures. And also, don't be afraid to schedule events and activities on your calendar in general, because it's more likely to happen if you schedule and publicize something. So if you say, I'm going to do a coffee with the counselor event in December, and let's say come December, you're like, oh, I don't think we're going to be able to do this in December. You'll probably do it in January because you have it listed. And when you feel like people are looking at your calendar, you'll probably do it. I do. So it makes you accountable. So don't be afraid to schedule events, but also don't be afraid to change them or change the timing on it, because sometimes there's different needs that arise, and that's okay. But in the beginning of the year, schedule things in, and then just know that it's fluid. You can change things. So these are some tips for you. I hope that's very helpful in this section of the RAMP application or in comprehensive school counseling programming. Please do not hesitate to reach out to anyone who is a part of PSCA to help you with this. Any of the speakers you heard during this entire RAMP camp, we have all been through the process. No question is a silly question. Please ask away. I just know from experience, I asked every blessed person that would listen to me every question I could. And it worked out, because then my application was considered our school was a school of distinction. And I was obsessive about asking. So please do not hesitate. You can ask me too. Any questions, because we support you. We know you can do this. And any kind of comprehensive school counseling programming for students is a win, really. Remember, the RAMP application is just a snapshot of the overall goal in having a comprehensive school counseling program. So I thank you very much for your time. Good luck. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you again.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the PA Diamond Ramp Camp. I am going to be presenting to you today about lesson plans. My name is Laura Zaharakis, and I earned ramp recognition for my school back in 2020. So the rubric has changed a little bit since then, but I am going to be talking to you about lesson plans using the new 2023 ramp rubric. First, I just wanted to say a little bit about lesson plans. When I started my career as a school counselor long time ago, I underestimated the power of lesson plans. And I really like this quote: a good plan is like a roadmap. It shows the final destination and usually the best way to get there. And if you use a Ask a National Model comprehensive school counseling program, you should be using lesson plans, which will help you deliver a functional, impactful school counseling program. So here's a little bit more about myself. I am currently working in a kindergarten through fifth grade public school in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It is an urban district with a lot of needs. We have between 600 and 650 students. I also just completed some coursework and an internship and will hopefully be getting soon my Supervisor of School Guidance Services certificate from the state of Pennsylvania. I've been a member of PSEA, our State School Counselor Association, for quite a few years. I've been a past board member or director, been on numerous committees. Currently, I am still leading the scholarship committee. I've also been very involved with our local SEA as a past president, vice president, and perhaps something that was very unexpected in my career. Along with my husband, we created SCUDA, School Counselor Use of Time Analysis, which is a web-based application to help school counselors harness data about how they spend their time serving their students and using that for reflection. Like I said before, I led my school team in earning RAMP designation back in 2020. And this past summer, I was also a RAMP reviewer for the first time, which was a really great professional growth experience as well. And definitely learned a lot from that, that hopefully will be integrated into my presentation with you today. So just to go over a little bit about the RAMP lesson plan requirements. In your RAMP application, you are required to provide 3 classroom lesson plans. These may or may not be part of a unit, so they can be standalone lessons or they can be part of a more extensive unit on a certain topic. Units and lesson plans can be on any topic that is part of a comprehensive school counseling program. So again, it can be from any of those 3 domains: academic, social emotional, or one having to do with career development. You also need to provide lesson plans for one of your small groups. So you need a lesson plan for each session of the group. Your group has to run for a minimum of 4 sessions. And a group is considered one in which there are 3 to 12 students. If you are servicing students in a group more than 12, then that would be considered a classroom or large group lesson plan. This is very, very important. These lesson plans must be aligned with the results reports in sections 8 and 9. So whatever you're reporting on in sections 8 and 9, these are the lesson plans that led to your capturing of that data about your students. And then I shared just a snapshot here of the rubric requirements for section 7. Like I'd said before, there is, you earn 1 point for your classroom lesson plans. All of those boxes need to be checked off. Very important, one ask a student standards identified for each lesson. In the past, that may have been best practice, but you could put in more. But right now, you only need and only should have 1 standard for each lesson. Um, the learning objectives need to be aligned with that student standard. The procedures need to clearly support attainment of those objectives. And you also need to include follow-up plans for anybody that may have missed the lesson, or perhaps you see that they are having difficulty attaining the learning objectives. So you need to include a follow-up plan describing your support and intervention for those students. You also will earn 1 point for your data collection plan. Your data collection plan in this section is just a plan. You are not reporting any data in this section of the RAMP application. You're going to include participation data plan. That is the expected number of students who will participate. The next descriptor that you need to make sure is met on your RAMP application is the Mindsets and Behaviors Data Collection Plan. What that is you are going to describe and even give an example of what your pre and post assessment tool looks like. Now, I mentioned this earlier about the units, but I want to make it clear here. If you have 3 standalone lessons, you need a mindsets and behavior plan for each of those 3 lessons. If your 3 lessons are part of a unit, you only need 1 plan that is going to assess the changes in the students' perceptions and knowledge, beliefs at the end of that unit. Also are going to include what your data assessment instrument looks like. But I also want to add, and you'll see this later on in the presentation, that there is a section on the lesson plan template for you to actually list the um, items of your assessment tool very specifically. The last part of the classroom lessons data collection plan is to describe what your outcome data is going, I don't want to say look like because you don't know the specific data points yet, but describe what kinds of data you are going to look at to assess the outcomes. That can be academic data, attendance data, or disciplinary data. So you're not reporting this, you just want to describe what you're going to do and what kind of outcome data you're looking at. Section 7C and 7D are essentially the same as A and B, except it's for your small group sessions instead of your classroom lessons. And then the last section, 7E, is your reflection. You will get 1 point for 7E if both of those descriptors are met. One is giving an example of how the Ask a Student standards inform the content of the lesson and drive the learning objectives, and from the learning objectives drives your assessments, your techniques, your procedures, everything should be circled back and related to the standards that you chose to address in that lesson. The second thing that you need to talk about in your reflection narrative is to give an example of how the Ask a Student standards inform the content of the small group sessions. So again, it's very similar. You're going to do one, I would say, paragraph for the classroom lessons and one paragraph addressing the small group lessons. I wanted to go over some lesson plan basics with you just to kind of clarify where to begin in determining what kinds of lessons your students could benefit from. A ramp quality lesson ultimately reflects the identified student needs. So you want to look at your student body and also data that is related to their achievement, their attendance, or discipline. And looking at that data, hopefully you'll be able to identify some skill gaps and some areas of potential growth. Once you identify those needs, that's going to help you take the next steps. You can also determine some needs based on staff surveys or needs assessments. You might do minute meetings with your students and have them kind of tell you where their learning gaps are in terms of social emotional learning, um, academics, career development, things like that. And also remember that you can always use your advisory council feedback to think about what do other people and other stakeholders see as needs within your student body. The needs identified will drive selection of the Ask a Student standards that will reflect the work of school counselors and in turn develop a variety of tiered interventions and supports. So once you determine the needs, you'll look at those Ask a Student standards, mindsets, and behaviors, find the standards that your students are in need of achieving or attaining, I should say. And then from there, you're going to develop some learning objectives and your lesson plans will develop from there. On this next slide, I have a little graphic in the thought bubble that I took from the Ask a National Model Implementation Guide. That text was very, very helpful for me to understand how intentional quality lesson planning needs to be in order to be effective. So basically, to summarize what I said in a lot of words on the previous slide, is your standard selection is going to be based on data which illustrates student needs. From those standards, you're going to create learning objectives. You're going to determine what the kids will do. From there, you're going to figure out how are you going to know if they can do it or not? How are you going to know if they have been changed by your lesson? And that will drive what kind of assessment tool you'll be using, whether it's a Likert scale or something that they create themselves. And then that information is going to drive your content and how you decide what activities, what kinds of information to share with them, so that they can attain that skills and knowledge. Remember to choose only one standard per lesson. Determine only one or two learning objectives that underscore the mindsets and behavior standards that you're targeting in the lesson. I did want to point out there that chapter 6 of the implementation guide is very helpful in getting you started with lesson planning. And also the ASCA student standards learning objectives database might be helpful. I hyperlink this here. This can be found on the ASCA website, and you can use a search there. Think about what standards you need to find some activities for, and that can help get you started as well. Some more lesson plan tips for success. Remember that your standards and the learning objectives are what drives the lesson plan. Learning objectives should be written in the active voice. It's all about what the students will do. Learning objectives will guide the assessment and data collection that will reflect how the students are changed by your intervention or tier 1 instruction. I threw that tier 1 in it because as a school counselor leading a comprehensive program, I am constantly thinking about my services in terms of tier 1, 2, and 3. And these lesson plans, the classroom lesson plans are part of your tier 1 efforts, and the small group would be considered part of your tier 2 efforts. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the lesson plan template. You must use this ASCA lesson plan template to get credit in this section. So in there, you can see school counselors kind of obvious, lesson plan titles kind of obvious. You want to check off whether it's a single classroom lesson or if it's part of a unit. You want to check off if it's part of a small group session, and then which lesson is it. So if you have a small group that's 8 sessions long, you are going to be submitting 8 lesson plans for that small group. Onto the target audience. That's basically your process data. Who's participating in the lesson? You want to give your grade level. If it's a specific group of students, you want to define the characteristic they have in common. If you're in a secondary setting, I often think about maybe when you're doing a lesson based on completing some part of the college application process. Not every single kid in your school is going to participate in that, but it may be several classrooms that you're going to be working with. So describe your target audience. You also need to check off if it's best practice, action research, research informed, or an evidence-based lesson. Okay, so to go over some other components of the Ask a Lesson Plan template, the student standards are those that I really talked about in the beginning of the presentation. Those are your mindsets and behaviors. Remember to only select one standard. The learning objectives, remember that these need to be measurable and they will describe what the students will be able to do. The materials, be very specific in that section. You can use hyperlinks or upload PDFs of any materials that you want to show, but be specific if it's access to a slide presentation, if it's any kind of written handouts, if you're doing anything that's a little hands-on and you have like index cards that describe different role play scenarios, everything and everything you put into that section for materials. Remember, when you're doing these lesson plans, you want to write them as if somebody else could come in and facilitate the lesson for you. I wanted to show you an example of the learning objectives just because in my experience as a RAMP reviewer, I did notice that this was an area that a lot of people struggled with. Um, you want to remember that your learning objectives should be written in an active voice and describe what the students will be able to do at the end of your lesson. You need to relate that objective to only one standard. And you can see from my example here, students will understand the importance of setting goals and identify the steps towards achieving them. Students will develop an individual goal sheet. Each of those statements are things that can be measured. The one about understanding the importance will probably be assessed with a student survey, perception, knowledge, and belief survey, and the students will develop a goal sheet. That's something that you're going to be able to see with your own eyes and just tally up. So they're both measurable. Another example I mentioned before that you want to be very, very detailed about your material section. In the description of the lesson procedures, this also needs to be clearly written and detailed so that anyone could execute the learning activity. So be detailed. Say you can even say exactly what you're going to say. You type in the questions that you're going to pose to the group to get them started. Explain in great detail every section. The part that's tricky about these lesson plans is this data collection plan. If multiple lessons are part of a unit, it only needs to be completed one time. So that's why in that box at the beginning of your lesson plan template, you're going to say um, if this lesson is part of a unit or not, so that that's clear to the reviewers. So participation data, this is your anticipated number of students. So for example, in my school, I have 100 first graders. I'm going to put 100 first graders in that box. My planned length of lesson, if it's 30 minutes, I'm going to put 30 minutes in there. The next section is Ask a Student Standards Data Plan. So I want you to list here the specific items and questions on the perception surveys. So if you're going to give a pre and a post test, what you want to do is actually list the items that the survey is asking the students to comment on. So again, that should be word for word, the exact same items that are on the actual survey that you administer to the students. And then the last section, the outcome data. You select only one outcome data point to measure. So you're either going to check off achievement, attendance, or discipline. Not all of them, not two of them, just one. And then you're going to describe how you're going to harness that data. Where is it coming from? What are you going to do to find your outcome data? So here I wanted to show you an example of that because this is a little bit trickier. Um, just remember the lesson plan does not include the actual data and your results. That's in those other sections of the application. This section, you only need to state the description of your plan and what you're going to do. So in this example, somebody is going to collect attendance data. That person is going to review attendance data for the targeted students, who are the students identified as having 5 or more absences by the end of the first quarter. And they're going to use that data to make comparisons between timeframes before and after the unit, and also a review of the end of the year attendance data. So that's a description of what you are planning to look at. It's not the actual data, it's just the plan. So now we're at the last section of the Ask a Lesson Plan template. In the follow-up section, you will describe how you're going to ensure that all students have an opportunity to participate in this lesson and that students will have the opportunity for remediation or re-instruction. So that means that if there are students who are absent from either your classroom lesson or your small group, during one of the sessions, you want to explain how you are going to deliver the lesson to those students who are missing for the initial presentation. The second part of the follow-up plan includes an explanation of how you're going to work with students who did not demonstrate mastery on the pre and post assessment of student standards, or they are not demonstrating attainment of the student learning objectives. So, what this means is you need to give us a description of what you are going to do to help those students attain the standards that you defined in your lesson plan. For example, I had done a lesson in third grade with my students about anger management and healthy coping strategies. Part of the lesson included the students making a little cheat sheet for themselves that they were going to keep in their agendas and at their desks about the coping strategies that work for them, kind of a visual reminder to use those strategies in the classroom. Some of the students were not able to complete the cheat sheet um, in a helpful way for themselves. Either they chose strategies that were not safe and healthy for the classroom, or they just didn't finish it. So I pulled those students together as a small group a couple days later and worked with them, gave them a little more time, retaught some of the content to help them master the learning objectives. And then the very last part of this section is your reflection. The narratives must include discussion of how the selected standards were addressed in the lesson. So make sure your lesson activities are reflecting and speaking to the standards that you're saying the lesson is addressing. Be specific in giving the examples. To achieve the points, the narrative must reflect on both your classroom or large group instruction and also your small group sessions. So make sure you have two paragraphs in there, one for the classroom lesson and one where you discuss the small group sessions. As we wrap up here, I did want to give you one last review of common pitfalls that prevent people from getting the maximum points that they can on the lesson plan section of the RAMP application. Um, some things to double check for and make sure that you haven't done them is that learning objectives are not measurable or related to the selected mindsets and behavior standards. Perception and outcome data plan is not related to the learning objectives. Specific items of the pre and post assessment are not included in the lesson plan. So remember, there's that little section there where in the template they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have to have four, you can have more, you can have less, but you do need to list the specific items or prompts of your pre and post assessment. And lastly, outcome data is not aligned with attendance, achievement, or discipline data. Those are the three kinds of data you can look at that we would describe as outcome data. So make sure that you are sharing um, data about those areas of student performance. I just wanted to put in here a slide about the references. That implementation guide is incredibly helpful for anyone who wants to facilitate and deliver a comprehensive school counseling program. It goes right along with the national model, but it gets a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of everything and what it looks like in terms of implementing supports for students to attain the student success skills, the ASCA mindsets and behaviors that I mentioned before. I also put on the slides, which I believe you're going to have access to, a link to the ASCA on air videos um, about each section of the application. And finally, I just want to wish you good luck on your RAMP journey. I wish you the best on your professional journey towards a RAMP quality comprehensive school counseling program. Um, It seems like a lot, but really, I believe that most school counselors are working towards a ramp quality program already. It's just learning how to package it for your application. And I hope that this little webinar on lesson plans was helpful. I believe it was a little repetitive in parts, but it's just to explain things in different ways to help you get the maximum points you can on your ramp application. So thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the day.